This episode includes discussions of emotional abuse, coercive control, infidelity, anxiety, panic attacks, and the process of recognizing an abusive relationship. It also references a television program that prompted personal reflection. The discussion of that program reflects my personal experience and the impact it had on my understanding of my relationship. It should not be interpreted as commentary on or a summary of the program itself. Welcome back to After the Quiet. This is episode 82. There are moments in life that divide everything into a before and an after. This episode is about one of those moments. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a police officer showing up at my door. It wasn't a lawyer or a judge. It wasn't even someone I knew. It was an afternoon when I happened to be watching an episode of Dr. Phil. By this point, it was early 2019. I was living with constant anxiety. The panic attacks had become part of my life. I felt nauseated whenever I was around my husband. I was being monitored at work. My phone was being searched in the middle of the night. I was constantly accused of cheating. Every conversation had become an interrogation. But, despite all of that, I still didn't think I was being abused. When people hear the word abuse, many picture bruises. We picture broken bones. We picture screaming matches. I didn't have that picture in my mind. I just thought I had an incredibly jealous husband. I thought if I could explain myself better, love him better, be more patient, maybe someday he would trust me. Then one afternoon, I watched an episode of Dr. Phil. The story centered on a married couple. The husband constantly accused his wife of having affairs. He recorded her conversations. He convinced himself he could hear evidence that she was cheating. He demanded she take a lie detector test. She agreed. She passed. And even then, he refused to believe the results. As I watched, I remember thinking, that's my life. Every accusation, every demand to prove herself, every attempt to convince someone of something that wasn't true. It felt painfully familiar. Then something happened that completely caught me off guard. The husband admitted that he had been the one having affairs. He said he wanted his wife to feel the same pain he felt. The irony was heartbreaking. She had never cheated. He had imagined it. Yet she had spent years trying to prove her innocence, while he was hiding his own betrayal. I sat there staring at the television. It felt like someone had taken pieces of my own life and put them on the screen. For the first time, I realized something that had never occurred to me before. I wasn't the only person living like this. Until that moment, I honestly believed my marriage was unique. I thought maybe I had somehow caused the jealousy. Maybe I wasn't reassuring enough. Maybe I smiled too much. Maybe I was too friendly. Maybe I had done something, somewhere along the way, that justified all the suspicion. Watching that episode shattered those beliefs. For the first time, I considered another possibility. What if this wasn't about me? What if no amount of reassurance would ever be enough? What if the accusations weren't based on anything I had done? Looking back now, I know something psychologists often talk about called projection. Projection is when someone attributes their own thoughts, feelings, or behaviors to another person. Not every accusation is projection. Not every jealous partner is being unfaithful. But in my case, I couldn't ignore the similarities. The person relentlessly accusing me was also someone who had been unfaithful himself. That realization stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. For days, the episode replayed in my mind. Eventually, I did something I had never done before. I found a therapist. Walking into that first appointment was terrifying. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't looking for someone to tell me to leave my marriage. I wasn't looking for someone to take sides. I just needed someone to help me understand why I felt so anxious all the time. As I started talking, the stories poured out. I talked about the accusations, the phone searches, the social media monitoring, the panic attacks, the nausea I felt whenever I was around him, the fear, the walking on eggshells, the constant need to prove I wasn't doing things I had never done. I expected questions. I expected uncertainty. Instead, my therapist listened quietly. And when I finished, she didn't hesitate. She looked at me and said, "You're being abused." I'll never forget those words, because no one had ever said them to me before. Not my doctor, not my family, not my friends, certainly not me. Abused. I remember feeling two completely opposite emotions at the exact same time. Relief and devastation. Relief because suddenly everything made sense. There was a reason I felt sick all the time. There was a reason I couldn't breathe. There was a reason my body was shutting down. My body wasn't broken. It was responding to an unsafe environment. But I also felt devastated. Because if she was right, then it meant the life I had spent years trying to fix wasn't something I could fix by becoming a better wife. It meant the problem wasn't my communication. It wasn't my personality. It wasn't my friendships. It wasn't my social media. It wasn't the books I read. It wasn't the Christmas party. It wasn't me. For 20 years, I had been trying to solve the wrong problem. that therapy session changed everything. Not overnight. I didn't leave the next day. I didn't suddenly become fearless. Understanding abuse and leaving abuse are two very different things. But something had shifted. Once someone gives you language for your experience, it's very difficult to unsee it. The behaviors I had excused for years suddenly had names: isolation, surveillance, intimidation, gaslighting, coercive control. And once I knew those words, I began seeing them everywhere. Looking back now, I often think about how strange it is that a television show became the first place I recognized my own life. Not because television has all the answers, but because for the first time, I saw someone else's story that reflected pieces of mine. Sometimes that's all it takes. One story, one conversation, one person saying, "That's happening to me too." If you're listening today and something in this episode sounds familiar, I encourage you to be curious. Ask questions. Talk to someone you trust. Speak with a therapist if you're able. You don't have to decide everything today, but you deserve to understand what you're living through. Because understanding is often the very first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to After the Quiet. If this episode resonated with you, please follow, share, and leave a review. Every story shared helps another person realize they're not alone. Until next time, take care of yourselves and keep finding your way through the quiet. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast and share it with others who might need to hear my story. And also join me on Instagram at after.the.quiet. If you recognize parts of my story in your own, please reach out to someone who can give you support, or look for that support in your community. You are not weak for needing help. You are human. Your voice deserves to be heard.